Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to today's important webinar, Protecting Muslim Teens, Addressing Behavior and Human Trafficking. We're so glad that you were able to join us this evening. My name is Sumaya Mahmood, and I'm the Anti-Human Trafficking Program Coordinator here at Sakina. We would like to begin by acknowledging the land on which we gather and which the region of Peel operates, which is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. For thousands of years, Indigenous peoples inhabited and cared for this land and continue to do so today. In particular, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe Chippewa peoples, the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently, the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land, and by doing so, give our respect to its first inhabitants. As parents, caregivers, educators, and community members, we're all aware of all the challenges and dangers that our youth face today. The pressures of modern life, online risks, and potential exploitation are realities that we need to understand and confront. And so this event is designed to equip us with practical tools that'll help keep our teens safe, empower them to make sound choices, and build stronger, trust-filled relationships within our communities. We are super fortunate to have an incredible lineup of panelists today. They'll share their insights on identifying warning signs, fostering open communication, and ways that we can all take proactive steps to protect and support our youth. And this brings us to our keynote today. I'm honored to introduce Omar Zia. Omar is currently a high school principal in Peel and a part-time instructor with Queen's University. He was a guidance counselor for 10 years and has taught ESL, special education, science, and English. Further, Omar is on the Council for Muslim Educators Network of Ontario and is the chair of the Muslim Employees Association of Peel. He has an avid interest in equity and inclusion work as it pertains to disrupting and dismantling racism and colonial practices which hinder student success. Omar is a member of the clergy and supports several community-based programs for Muslim identifying youth. Thank you again, Omar, for joining us today, and the virtual floor is yours.
It's my pleasure. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to be here with you. I'm a bit under the weather, so forgive me if my voice kind of comes in and out. To begin with, thank you to Sakina Canada for inviting me to be here, and I hope that all of you are able to benefit from this small, quick presentation on human trafficking. It's important to know where I'm coming from. Currently, I'm a high school principal, but as mentioned, I did spend 10 years as a guidance counselor. And as a guidance counselor, I did deal with several issues of human trafficking among students at the different schools that I was at. And I've also, as an administrator, both vice principal and principal, dealt with the same issue as well. I'm so thankful to be here with a great group of panelists who I think probably outclass me in terms of their knowledge and expertise. So I look forward to hearing from them and learning from them as well after this short presentation to begin with. My email address is here on this first screen. So if you'd like to get a copy of the presentation, just send me a quick email and I'll send it your way immediately. So before we begin, it is important to know that the content we're about to go into is not easy. There's a lot of trigger warning. There are a lot of triggers that can happen when we go through a topic such as this. Some of us in the virtual room here may have direct or indirect experience dealing with human trafficking. So I'm just going to ask everybody, please, using the adult learning model, monitor your own self, your own symptoms. If you do require support, there are supports that I've listed over here for you. If at any time, after this presentation, you require support, the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline is there on the screen. Sakina Homes, of course, sakinacanada.com is available. And anywhere you are in Canada, if you dial 211, it will link you directly to mental health supports anywhere in the entire country. It's also important to note that when we are speaking about people who have experienced human trafficking, it's important that if we are talking to them, speaking with them about their experiences, that we allow them to use a language that depicts or represents what their experiences were. That's just a side note in case this ever comes up in conversation with any of you who are here who might be involved, obviously, in different facets of life. So what is human trafficking? It is a hidden crime. And that's the most important aspect to remember, is that when I work with kids, or I work with staff, and I work specifically with parents, It's often a crime that has gone undetected for a long period of time. It's not something that just appeared overnight. And oftentimes the reaction from parents, siblings, extended family is shock. How could this have been happening? And believe it or not, as we go through the presentation, sometimes students themselves, kids themselves, are shocked to understand that what has been happening to them is considered human trafficking. Human trafficking involves recruitment, transportation, harboring, or exercising control over, direction, or influence over the movements of a person in order to exploit that person. Typically, it is through sexual exploitation. That can also be forced labor, labor trafficking. It could also be to transport drugs, for example. It could be used in a wide variety of ways to probably come up in our conversation throughout the evening. It is important to note that there is no universal experience of human trafficking because each individual who experiences this has their own experiences with it. And those who survive this trauma, there's so many ways that they express how they have survived or how they've come out of that journey that impacted their lives. And we'll show us a quick video from Covenant House with the actual survivor explaining their journey. So once again, it is recruitment, it is transfer, transportation, harboring, and receipt of persons. It is often used with threats, so there is obviously a power dynamic that is so vast that the victim does not really necessarily see a way out or support out of that situation. The abuse of power of people who are vulnerable oftentimes are young ones. And of course, it is related to deception and fraud. Now, the most important part I want to look at is the purpose. So sexual exploitation, this is often where our minds go to human trafficking. But as I mentioned, drugs and drug trafficking, oftentimes young people are recruited and put in into these positions, and this is considered trafficking as well through drugs, through using humans to traffic drugs. Now, there are some very extreme versions of that, which I'm sure our officer might be able to share later on, but you may have heard of or even seen depictions of this in sometimes Hollywood movies where people have parts of their bodies stitched open, drugs entered inside and then stitched back up again. And of course, I'm sure officers will be able to tell whether or not this is something that's fictional or non-fictional. But to give you an example of where, how extreme it could be. But I also want to mention, given the context that we're in, is that faith extremism, religious extremism, can also come under the concept of human trafficking. Oftentimes, people who are interested in setting an extremist agenda, or forget the terminology, but terrorist agenda. And they very much focus on recruiting kids when they're actually in school. And this impacts high school students and university or college students. And I've experienced working with kids in both universities and in high schools who have become victims. I'm not talking about well-known organizations like Tablighi Jamaat, for example. That's not what I'm talking about. But there are sinister forces at play who may claim or not even claim to be Muslim, and yet they're recruiting Muslim youth to carry forth a sinister agenda that's used to recruit young ones and then engage them in trafficking of weapons, trafficking of drugs, or in some cases, trafficking of bomb-making materials and the like thereof. I also want to give one quick example of non-sex human trafficking, or non-human trafficking with regards to non-sexual, is that one of the schools I was at, students were being recruited in grade 9 and grade 10 to go and steal cars. I mentioned it because it's something we are hearing about in the news for the past few years. I'm sure our officer will be able to mention something about that as well. And what these students were doing, they were recruited by an elder person hanging out at the Tim Hortons right next to the school, and they would go into LA Fitness and observe when people would put their stuff away and go work out. They'd break into the lockers, steal the keys, and they would then go on and steal the cars. And this was repeated over and over again for the same group of kids. So it is something, so that also comes under the condition or the understanding of human trafficking. So sometimes kids feel that they're involved in something which is greater than themselves. Maybe they feel a bit of a cool factor with it as well. But in reality, that still comes under the definition of human trafficking. Now, we are in Peel, and Peel region is one of the hotspots. In fact, it is the hotspot for human trafficking, human sex trafficking within the entire country. But one of the reasons for that is because of where it's located. all of the major highways, 410, 403, 401, 407, all pass through Peel. And although they call it the Toronto International Airport, in reality, the airport is actually located in Mississauga. Train stations are also very accessible within Mississauga, within Peel region. And so as a result of that, it becomes a great hub. The other two cities that are very well known as locations or central hubs are both Montreal and Windsor. And again, proximity to the border, proximity to shipping yards, and I'm sure our officer can talk about the same thing with car thefts. A lot of them seem to be ending up in the ports in Montreal. So these are also corridors where human sex trafficking occurs. So these are just some stats to share that 2/3 of human trafficking reports are incidents are reported, but most often they are not. Oftentimes it's because of the shame that kids are experiencing that they don't feel like they can actually go and tell anybody. So oftentimes human sex trafficking incidents do not go reported. It's not on here, but in 2009, the rate in Peel region was 0.65 per 100,000. But in 2016, we can see that went up to 1.14. So there's definitely an increase in human trafficking that's been happening. And one of the ways that human traffickers target kids is by looking at their cultural barriers that may exist and using that shame-based trauma to enforce their hold over these kids. So 62% of Canadian human trafficking cases originate in the GTA itself, and the average age is 12 to 24, although nowadays the age can be as low as 8 or 9. Even post-COVID, access to social media accounts, access to devices. I've been reading, and you probably are reading yourself, but we've been hearing cases in our own board of kids who are in grade 4 and grade 5 actually being trafficked, which is quite disturbing. 2/3 of the victims are trafficked in Ontario are Canadian citizens. That's important to note. Oftentimes people feel that this is just something that impacts newcomers, but in fact it does impact people who are currently Canadian citizens. Most often kids who are born and raised within Canada. 95% of victims reporting human trafficking are women and girls. That doesn't mean that boys are also not trafficked in some sort or another. And that's why I was mentioning the different examples of trafficking, because males may not always be sex trafficked, but they might be involved in trafficking in other ways, or they might be engaged in recruiting females to be sex trafficked as well. And most of the victims of human traffic are trafficked by someone that they actually know. And I'll just mention that right now because it's right there. Okay, so this is from 2022 from StatsCan. Listing again more statistics regarding what's been happening in our country. 82% of incidents of human trafficking reported in all of our metropolitan areas across the country. But the 94% or 95% are women and girls. But the last bullet point, 91% of victims were trafficked by someone they knew, and 34% were trafficked by an intimate partner. So when we're talking about our kids in school settings, this is exactly what we are finding. We have found a number of cases where young girls are being recruited by either their someone who claims to be their boyfriend in the same grade as they are, or maybe slightly older than them. We'll talk about some of the factors in a few moments. Sometimes they are also being trafficked by their friends, brothers, older brothers. In some cases, and all the examples I'm giving are my personal experiences. I don't want to talk for the entire Board of Education or the entire country, but in my practice, I've also come across girls being trafficked by someone else's mother or someone else's grandmother, as crazy as that might sound. So it's interesting to note that there's always a link, at least in my experience, is that they're linked between, like there's some sort of relationship. It's not necessarily random out of the blue. We have had cases where they're out of the blue, but that's only been a couple of cases in my own experience. So who's most at risk for sex trafficking? Females, especially children, and queer students, queer youth. Indigenous women, this has been going on for years. I'm sure many of us are aware of the missing Indigenous women. Most schools across Ontario have some activities to bring awareness to this ongoing issue. And if you're not aware, This has actually been going on since Harper's time when he was prime minister and he refused to do anything about it. Racialized women and children. Racialized means anybody who's not white. Individual with history of physical or sexual abuse. Children and youth in care or transitioning out of care. So students who are in foster care, students who are coming in and out of juvenile detention centers, and homeless and marginalized youth. Marginalized youth, what does that mean? It doesn't necessarily just mean Black or Indigenous or other racialized, as oftentimes that's what it refers to. Marginalized youth is someone who is not able to find a commonality between their own identities and the identities of their environment. So oftentimes, let's say I'm a newcomer from a different country, I have a certain set of values, and those set of values just don't jive with the environment that I'm in. So I then I self-isolate myself from the environment, and I become marginalized as a result of that. And as a principal, when I'm walking in the hallways, what am I looking for? I'm looking for these students, because you'll find most kids are hanging out with 2 or 3 friends, or even like sometimes larger groups, but you will see kids who are just alone. And oftentimes these kids have special education needs, so they have IEPs. Sometimes these kids don't have social skills, don't have the ability to look for social cues, and just have difficulty making relationships. So a lot of schools, including my own, we do have what we call an integration group, where we have 2 or 3 teachers who also look for these kids and help them make a sense of belonging with the school. And this is the last point I want to mention here, is that who's most at risk. And again, speaking as principal, as a guidance counselor, coming from a school-based setting, students with low self-esteem, who are isolated or lack a sense of belonging. Sense of belonging is so important that the Ministry of Education has been talking about this since 2020. And every Board of Education creates what's called School Improvement and Equity Planning Goals. And in Peel Region, the Peel District School Board now calls it the multi-year strategic plan. All these goals and plans have a requirement, 3 goals in a school building that specifically talk to how is a school creating a sense of belonging for their students. And the reason for that is, one of the reasons for that is sex trafficking, disengagement of students, low achievement results, and so on and so forth. But this is something that is very, very important. So parents who are listening into this conversation, it is so important that if we cannot help our kids find a sense of belonging in their school environment, they need to have that sense of belonging at home. And oftentimes, as parents, we might be very busy, we're very tired when we get home, we may not have the energy, but given where we are living in 2024, and given all the external factors that are impacting our kids' development, it is so important that we have this connection with our kids, because it's not just sex trafficking, it impacts their ability to do well in school, it impacts who they make friends with, it also impacts then whether they're being bullied or not, it impacts their academic achievement, it impacts their sense of self-esteem, high or low, depending on the confidence instilled in them by their parents and by their family community. So we're going to watch a quick film that was produced by Peel District School Board regarding the myths and realities about human sex trafficking to clarify some of the things I've mentioned.
Omar, we just can't hear the video in case there's audio. We'll have to like share the sound.
Only women in
Thanks for letting me know. Give me a second. I'm just going to exit and see if I can share the sound. If someone knows how to do that, let me know.
When you share your screen, it should
Should pop up.
Yep.
Let me try to, I'll try it again. I can't see the settings. Give me 1 second. I'll give it another attempt. Apologies for the delay, folks. Oh, there it is. I see it. And now?
Only women and girls can be victims of sex trafficking.
Identity does not define who is at risk. Systems create risk for identities oppressed within them.
Traffickers kidnap and target victims they don't know, usually from other countries.
Peel region has been identified as a human trafficking hub. Many survivors have been trafficked by peers, partners, and also by family members.
Human trafficking is the same as human smuggling. Victims are kidnapped.
In most reported cases of human trafficking in Ontario, the person trafficked is from Canada and is recruited within Canada.
Physical violence and drug dependence is always involved.
Manipulation and coercion can be powerful enough to control victims. Sometimes just the fear of physical violence toward the victim or their family is enough.
Social media is always a safe place for students to connect with one another, especially during the pandemic.
Social media has been used by traffickers to recruit victims, to run their trafficking operations, and to control their victims through restricting social media access, impersonating the victim, and spreading lies and rumors online.
Some people choose to be involved in exploitive situations.
You cannot consent to being trafficked. Just because someone initially consents to commercial sex does not mean that they consent to acts of force, fraud, or coercion.
If a person isn't kept locked up or in chains, why don't they just leave?
The reality is, people in trafficking situations stay for reasons that are more complicated. Some lack the basic necessities to physically get out, such as transportation or a safe place to live. Some are afraid for their safety. Some have been so effectively manipulated that they do not identify at that point as being under the control of another person. Due to the nature of the coercion and grooming, many cases of human sex trafficking go unreported. Many cases are still in the courts under the judicial process and therefore result in lower reported numbers. Some marginalized racial and gender identity groups are at higher risk. We need to understand that identity is not the cause for higher risk. Colonial, patriarchal, white supremacist systems marginalize and create the risk for identity groups. Average age for recruitment into sex trafficking is 13. 2/3 of cases reported in 2018 were from Ontario. 45% of the victims were women between the ages of 18 and 24. One study estimates that as many as half of sex trafficking victims and survivors are male. Advocates believe that percentage may be even higher, but that male victims are far less likely to be identified due to ideals of masculinity in the dominant patriarchal society. LGBTQ boys and young men are seen as particularly vulnerable to trafficking. Sex trafficking is a growing issue in our community. It may affect your friends and loved ones and can be devastating if not prevented or stopped. It is so important that we educate ourselves and do our part in helping to raise awareness of the dangers to our youth. As educators, it is our duty.
So I hope that clarifies some of the information I was sharing with you. Forgive me, I'm looking at the time and I had this habit of over-preparing. I apologize. I'll try to get through the next bit as quickly as possible. So one of the things that I want to mention is that to understand like some of the, how do kids, how easy is it for kids to kind of get lured in? So this comment, you're beautiful or you're really cool, it really targets students who have low self-esteem. And it's so important to know that human traffickers, it's not something they just pick a kid at random. They will sometimes spend months observing kids, observing them in different locations, on the school grounds and then at the mall. I put it before, like Square One Mall is one of the biggest hubs where kids are actually picked up. Saying something something as simple as "you're beautiful" to a kid who doesn't have a high self-esteem, who's never been told that by a parent or a loved one or by anybody else, the first person who says it to them, it has an impact, right? Job offers, easy money, like modeling, television, even dancing for that matter, right? Oftentimes kids are looking for quick money, and it starts with one small job, and then it's just one time to do other kind of a modeling situation, which could be sex trafficking. Being a parental figure, and this is the #1 lure that we have seen in our schools, where you have a grade 12 student who now starts to groom a kid in grade 9. And after maybe a few months or even a year, you'll find that there's an interesting relationship develops between the older and the younger. I've even seen kids who have graduated, who then are hanging around during lunch hour or before and after school, looking for their own sibling, but in reality, they're looking out and scoping out students to lure and to play that parental figure for older sibling. And given the year 2024, where we don't have a lot of kids going home to parents or loved ones or family, they might be looking for that parental figure. So oftentimes we see this, where kids are showing up with gifts. They've got clothing, and no one knows where they got the money for their clothing. In fact, sometimes when I sat with parents, it said, "Have you noticed what your child's wearing? Have you bought that? No. Did you pay $200 for those shoes? No. Where are they getting the money? Well, I never knew. Never thought about it." Right. So this is something that often happens, and it's not something as it could be flashy, like they have a brand new like Louis Vuitton jacket or a purse or something, but it could be something very, very subtle. The one incident that comes to my mind where a girl was just receiving stuffed animals because that was her thing, and her father, when we debriefed the whole situation, said he just showed up one day into her room and found like 50 stuffed animals, whereas she only had one before. And he never clued into where she was finding the money to buy all these stuffed animals. And of course, the question, what do humans crave above all else, is love. So our kids are looking for love. And if they don't find it at home, if they don't find it with their own parents or siblings, they're going to find it somewhere else. And when someone offers them that love, that attention, that affection, those gifts that they've always wanted, right? Even I didn't put it here, but even buying video game consoles for kids, right? That also comes into play. And the last one is online contact, being an online boyfriend. And this is also very, very common, where discussing issues with students whose friends are oftentimes trying to get them help. There's always this online boyfriend who seems to be magically never there, almost like Pokeroo, if you're as old as I am. Okay, I want to show another quick 5-minute video, I apologize. And then 5 minutes after that, we're done, okay? This is the video from Covenant House.
I'm Amy. I did really well in school. I had a lot of friends, but I really hated the way I looked. I started dating Ryan. He just seemed really interested in me. He gave me a lot of attention. He loved me. He just made me feel really good about myself. We talked a lot about what we wanted and the future. I was in love with him. After 2 months, he started telling me he had money problems. He told me his friend's girlfriend was opening a massage parlor, and I should go and work there.
Sex trafficking is when someone is forced to sell sex against their will. This is happening right under our noses. It could be happening to a girl just like a girl you know. They are lured in public places, schools, malls, and online.
All our victims to date have come from Toronto or somewhere else in Canada.
The girls that I work with are 16 to 24. I do get calls about girls as young as 12 and 13 years old. They can be an ace student at school, but still not have self-confidence. So that is a common thread with all the girls that I work with.
He told me it would only be for a little while. You know, we would make all this money and buy a house. I was working 12 hours a day. I was in so much pain from having sex.
The way that they lure the girls is to romance them, compliment them that they're pretty, to buy them nice things, to shower them with attention.
Girls, they fall in love with these guys. These guys become their boyfriends at first.
I had this total breakdown, and I was crying, and I told him, I don't know if I could do this, letting these guys be all over me. He was like, you better figure out how to deal with it, because I'm not going to be with a girl who isn't giving me money.
Typically, one girl could make a pimp about $250,000 a year, and that's just one girl. It's very lucrative. It's as lucrative or even more lucrative than selling firearms or drugs.
And I'm hearing conversations like, if we killed her, like we can just bury her somewhere up north and no one will ever find her. I was just so scared. And the thought going through my head is that he really could have killed me.
The trafficker imposes lots of rules on the girls, so they're not allowed to eat or sleep without his permission. They're not allowed to go out on their own. Even if they are, he is watching their every move, and they know not to go against what he's telling them they have to do.
I felt so much shame and guilt. And I still didn't understand that I'd been pimped out.
Some of the red flags to look for when you suspect someone might be sex trafficked. The girl has nice, expensive clothing. She's going out and she's not telling you where she's going. Her grades at school might start to slip, and her world becomes more and more secretive. She talks about having a boyfriend in her life, but she's not going to introduce that guy to the family. My hope for these girls is they reclaim their lives and go after their dreams and have a good life.
As the authors I mentioned over there, that extremely lucrative. In fact, in 2024, they actually say that now there's more human sex trafficking the cases of human sex trafficking have now outpaced the cases on drugs and on firearms, illegal firearms. So we're going to go through some of the signs that were mentioned there. Actually, one thing I want to mention, question sometimes people ask is, why don't they leave? Like, why don't kids, if they know something's going wrong with them or something's not appropriate happening, why don't they leave? And so, as the girl had mentioned in the video we just saw, sometimes they don't even realize that what they're doing is human trafficking. They're just not aware of it because they don't know what it is, which is why seminars like this are so important. But also that relationship, sometimes they call it the Romeo pimp, somebody who's actually like that, have that romantic relationship. That's where it begins from. And then it becomes the gorilla pimp, where it's like actual threatening violence. And as she mentioned, she thought that she was hearing voices that they're going to try and kill her and bury her somewhere else. Sometimes there's threats against the victim's family, which is the number one, in my experience, the reason why the kids have actually not come forward, because they're worried that what might actually happen to their families. Because the pimp oftentimes has personal information about the parents, siblings, and so on. And oftentimes the case is that there is some sort of an addiction that the victim has that the pimp is providing for, whether it be money, whether a place to live, clothing, a drug addiction. And so this is, again, reasons why kids are difficult. It's difficult for victims to get out. Okay, signs to look for. So first of all, interest in a male or a female several years older than they are. This is one. This is something to look for. It could be a friend. It could be a girlfriend, boyfriend. It could even be, forgive me for saying so, but it could be a known family member. It could be an older uncle. All of a sudden, there's this renewed interest with this uncle, and they are spending a lot more time alone than they ever have had before, right? Or it could be an older male from school, even within college or university, or within the community. It could be the local mosque, for that matter. Just looking at that relationship that our child might be forming with somebody who's several years older, and it's not something which is normal. New clothing or jewelry or gifts, especially when we know the child doesn't have money for it, right? So it could also be access to drugs, vapes, marijuana. It could be also trips to extravagant restaurants, like going to a 5-star restaurant or expensive places to eat. There could also be sleepovers at a friend's house. Personally, as a parent, my children have never slept over anywhere, and this is one of the reasons why. But this is a reason. This is a place where these types of things happen. So when I mentioned earlier, an example about a mother and a grandmother recruiting their child's kids, sorry, their child's friends into trafficking, it started at the sleepover. It was a birthday party sleepover, and that's where that whole trafficking began. And there were 2 girls who were trafficked by the mother and grandmother. All of a sudden, a drastic change in wearing makeup, looking very good, wearing certain types of fancier dresses. But it's got to be something which is sudden, not something that they kind of do once in a while, now they're doing more, but an actual sudden change where it looks like maybe they are being manipulated. Different set of friends or isolation from their current group, and they seem to be find themselves marginalized. A change in attitude towards school, towards activity, some sort of withdrawal or self-exclusion. They used to be involved in sports, all of a sudden no more. Used to hang out with this group of friends, all of a sudden they hate everybody. Used to be, loved going to school, all of a sudden now they want to be home all the time or don't want to go to school. And then the other part is grades dropping. So a significant drop in their grades associated with the difference in attitudes towards school. That's oftentimes a red flag. Unexplained bruises or cuts, especially on the face or on the arms or on the back. And this is a telltale sign for us in education is when we see kids with 2 cell phones. 3 of the cases that I've dealt with in the last 4 years at my current school, it has been kids with 2 cell phones. And it's just a red flag that goes up immediately. So something for parents to look for as well. As parents, we might want to have conversations at home. And as I mentioned, I can share these slides with you, but also when I share them with you, what's embedded here are links to more recent stories. So June, September, October of actual incidents happening within Peel region. And then I'm sure, hopefully by now everybody's aware of what P. Diddy's been up to. It's completely exposed online. And that's definitely an entry point to have conversations with our kids. Because oftentimes kids are more likely to be aware of pop culture icons. And that can be an open way to get into conversations. And another example, not P. Diddy, but this guy's name is Ice-T, otherwise known as Tracy Morrow. He's an actor and then used to be a rapper. So if you're as old as I am, you probably grew up listening to Ice-T. And he plays a cop on Law and Order. Now, forgive my brother officer here, because this is offensive to him, as should be offensive to all of us. So this is what he does on TV, and in real life, he's actually hosts shows online for pimps. And he actually held, it was something called the Soul Awards back in 2012, where he actually gave out awards to pimps. It was like the Grammys, but for pimps. And he is the one who heads it all up. And yet on the screen, he plays the role of a police officer, right? I just took a still shot from one of the many videos that are up about him promoting pimps and so on. And he goes to these parties and raps and promotes pimps. So it just shows you that it's not just P. Diddy, it's almost everywhere. It's not just the Square One Mall, but our kids are being exposed to people in their lives who actually promote this type of lifestyle. It's sickening and it's everywhere. So hopefully the more that we're able to be aware of it, the more we'll be able to overcome it. And the last slide just has some references to stats that I posted in the presentation. So Jazakallah khairan, I know I went over time, I apologize for that. I talk a lot, I apologize.
Thank you so much, Omar, for sharing all your personal experiences. It really adds depth to the gravity of the situation and all the important conversations that we need to have with our youth. And it sets the tone for our conversation that we will have with our panelists. We are going to break for Maghrib, which is our prayer after sunset. We will reconvene at around 6:52. I will write that in the chat and we'll see everyone then. Okay, welcome back. I'd like to now introduce our next 2 panelists who bring diverse perspectives and their own expertise to this conversation. First, we have Police Constable Farhan Ali. Farhan is a Muslim liaison officer working in the Community Partnerships and Engagement Unit He previously worked as a primary response officer and more recently as a neighborhood community officer in the Thorncliffe Park community within 53 Division. He has a passion for community work and has had great success connecting with his communities through traditional policing practices and by leveraging unconventional methods like social media platforms, podcasts, and other initiatives to establish meaningful connections. Joining us as well is Salma Lashmi. Salma is a registered social worker with a bachelor's master's of social work from Toronto Metropolitan University. She has extensive experience working with Every Mind as a child and family therapist and Cedar Way Therapy as a psychotherapist. Salma has supported diverse populations across nonprofits, community centers, schools, and previously collaborated with the anti-human trafficking team at Victim Services of Peel to assist survivors. Her work is rooted in mental health, trauma-informed care, and advocacy for positive change. And then lastly, we have our moderator for the panel discussion, Leila Al-Fadli, Pathy Foundation Fellow working on the Anti-Human Trafficking Program with Sakina Canada. Leila has actively engaged with various advocacy efforts within her community, particularly in the areas concerning women's reproductive health rights and the fight against gender-based violence. Her efforts have resulted in policy changes within institutions guaranteeing equitable access to crucial women's health products. Thank you all for joining us today. I will pass on the virtual microphone to Leila.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Samaya, for the introduction. Okay, so let's start with an overview of the early signs of vulnerability, which I know Omar has talked extensively about, but I wanted to kind of talk a little bit more about the subtle signs Muslim teenagers display in schools that parents might not be aware of. So I'll direct this question to you, Omar, back. What are these subtle signs Muslim teenagers display in school that parents might not be aware of, which makes them more vulnerable to exploitation?
So when it comes to Muslim youth specifically, one of the most subtle signs is actually them saying, well, I'm not that religious. I know it sounds very strange to hear that, and it's a very, very subtle, very small phrase that I've heard a number of students mention right before we start to find out that they're involved in a lot of different parts of grievances against the Education Act and criminal activity, not limited to, but also including trafficking. And it's a thought in the mind. Having spoken with a number of these students, it's a thought in the mind that occurs that, well, I want to engage in this. I want to have this identity, or I want to be known as this personality. I want to be loved or accepted. And so the only way to get that thing I want, to find that sense of belonging, to build a group of people around me, I need to shave off, not completely eliminate being Muslim, but shave off the perception that I'm religious. Right, so that's something that I often find is a very subtle element, but something that I would say is common across all the way. I've never come across a kid who is from a Muslim family who's Muslim that will ever say I'm not Muslim. No, but they'll say I'm not that religious, and that might lead to a removal of the hijab. It might lead to not showing up for prayers because they don't feel worthy of showing up to Friday prayer because they are involved in things they know are not going to be accepted by the Muslim crew that they're with. But that's not where they want to get the credibility that they want. They want it with a different group. And so this is, again, that's something I would just offer. Something that's so if you are, as a parent, having conversations with our teenagers on a regular basis about what it means to be Muslim, and helping our kids navigate their way through their Muslim identity. This is my conversation I had with parents about how to help our kids during this specific age, because oftentimes as parents, we've already gone through that journey. We already are where we are. We have our ideals, we have our principles of belief, and we are strong and we're set in them. But our kids are still exploring. So rather than imposing and then them rebelling, whether it's now or later, again, remember that we did say that a lot of them are 12 to 24, but when the other stats is 18 to 24, sometimes kids rebel when they get to university, right? Especially if they're living away from home on campus somewhere. A lot of doors are opened up. So it is important to be the guide on the side and help facilitate that journey. Not just their identity as Muslims, their gender-based identity, in some cases their sexual identity, their identity in terms of who they want to be when they grow up, where their position is in the family, where their position is in society. So many different elements and facets of identity.
Such a nuanced perspective. I mean, you touched on communication, so I'll kind of jump right into that. Selma, what are some effective communication strategies parents or caregivers can use to discuss human trafficking like topics, or even encourage their teenagers to open up about these topics, especially when they're very hesitant or withdrawn?
Yeah, so like Omar said, open communication is everything. We really, really need to ensure that we're having that open communication with our kids, that it's judgment free, that you're always creating space for them to be able to talk to you. A lot of times kids are going through something and maybe they'll talk to the parent and they might get like a judgmental comment or they might get yelled at, and because of that they'll shut down. And so if that's something that the kid is used to, it is very likely that in times of need or in times of, say if they're in a situation where they are being trafficked or hanging out with the wrong people, they're not going to go to their parents, right? Because they've made that association of my parents are just going to yell at me. They're just going to get mad at me. They're going to kick me out of the house, right? So biggest thing is that open communication, that non-judgment, always making time for your youth, always making time to have one-on-one conversations with them where it's just you and them. There's no one else. There's no other kids around. There's no other parent around. Just having that open dialogue with them consistently, consistently having check-ins with them, how was your day? How was school? Asking open-ended questions. So not asking questions where you're just going to get a good or a yes or a no, really asking them about their day and really asking about the people that they're hanging out with and the things that they're doing to really foster that like open line of communication. So those would be the biggest things, is just really having that open space for them, making them know that you're there for them and that if they mess up or if they get in a situation that's dangerous, you're not going to react badly. You're not going to kick them out. You're not going to shut them out. Instead, you are going to help them and create those avenues and those spaces where they can be safe and that they can be okay.
Adding on to that, Selma, are there any like culturally sensitive approaches you'd recommend, especially when considering like Muslim parents or caregivers of Muslim teens, to foster those open communications?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is having open conversations about this and not talking about it because it's taboo. A lot of times in the Muslim community, it's very common for parents to just say, oh, like, I don't even want to think about trafficking. I'm not going to talk about it to my kids because I don't want them to get any ideas. When in fact, that's very harmful, because we have to acknowledge that these things are happening and that it is affecting Muslim youth. And so the biggest thing is talking about the uncomfortable things to make sure that your kid is aware of such things and knows that this stuff is happening. So at a young age, having these conversations, also making sure that they're very involved in the community. They're letting them know that there are a ton of resources that they can access should something like this happen and should they not be comfortable opening up to you. So, taking them to community events, making sure they're aware of helplines like Nasiha, like Omar said, or resources, making sure that they do have the right spaces and the right people to access if they're, for example, not comfortable speaking to their parent.
Thank you. I think a lot of the time within the community, we feel like human trafficking doesn't exist. And I know Omar touched on a couple of specific examples and personal examples, but I'll switch this to Farhan. From your experience, can you share any like real world cases where Muslim or racialized teens have been targeted by traffickers? And what were those red flags?
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thanks for having me here. Now, I can't speak to specifics, obviously, because of privacy issues and obviously like cases that I've dealt with personally, not so much on the human trafficking side. I want to preface this by saying I'm not a trained human trafficking expert by any stretch, but I have spoken with our detective constables that work in the units, and they've given me some insight that I can provide from a policing perspective. Now, in terms of personal experiences that I can speak to, like I have spoken to people while I worked as a neighborhood community officer about instances that they have dealt with on the personal level. And the challenge that comes up, and Brother Omar had mentioned earlier, sometimes, and I think oftentimes, the person that is victimizing them is a family member or someone that's known to them. And the challenge I found in our community was that because this person was related to them, the conversation, even though it came up, there were charges laid, that kind of got sidetracked because of that relationship that existed. Because it was a family member, there was interference from the parents saying, no, we shouldn't do this because this is a family member. So it makes it challenging in that sense, where we have to be mindful that the law is the law and right is right. Just because this person is a family member doesn't mean they shouldn't be held accountable for the things that they're doing, especially when they're victimizing somebody that's young and obviously vulnerable, right? So In terms of that, that's been my personal experience and something I dealt with personally. However, human trafficking also is something that can affect anyone. It's not just limited to one community or one gender, as we had discussed earlier, Brother Omar had mentioned. Survivors come from all different races, religions, cultures, economic groups, right? And a few of the warning signs just to be aware of, and I believe a few of you have touched on these: secrecy, silence, isolation from people who really care about them. When you notice that they're being controlled by others or driven from one location to another, and they're always being escorted by somebody somewhere, right? They don't have control over their money or their cell phone, or they may have more than one cell phone, like Brother Omar was mentioning. That is a big red flag that you've noticed as a principal, right? Not being allowed to contact their family or friends. So if their contact has dropped and they don't call as often as they used to or as regularly as checking in as they do, then there are causes for concern as to why that shift in behavior has come up. Lying about simple things like their age or using fake IDs, if they have scripted or rehearsed answers to any casual questions that you may have. And again, like you had also mentioned, the cash. Where does this cash come from? Where are you getting this money to buy yourself these fancy shoes or this purse or whatever it is that you have? Like, parents really have to chime in and clue into where these things are coming from. And if they're not the ones providing it, clearly it's coming from somewhere. And that's something that they need to be aware of and address as soon as they see it.
You brought up some of the signs. So with social media being a huge part of teens' lives, can you how can parents or what can parents and caregivers do to really improve their teens' online safety, and particularly in the age of cyber grooming?
So we do have a great resource, and this is something that brought to my attention by our human trafficking team. We have a website, which I'll share the link for. I also do have a slideshow that I can share as well for people to get these references. But there is a list of all the different things. So there's quite a few points that I can mention, and I'll go over them quickly, so just so people have an idea of what to look for. But also I'll share this with you, so you don't have to jot this stuff down, okay? So know what your kids are doing online. Know the usernames and the passwords of all their social media accounts. It could be something someone mentioned in the chat there about Roblox. I think it was Brother Omar that mentioned it's a place where kids are getting groomed. Now, I know, because I've used Roblox before, there are parental settings that you can put in there. However, there are always ways around it, right? So there's only so much you can do to regulate and put on parental controls. But unless you're monitoring exactly what your kids are doing on there, because they have access or people have access to them, the grooming can still happen. So just be very mindful about what their activities online. Educate yourself on what social media accounts your child is using: Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat. All these apps, they're all different methods of communication. You may think, oh, I'm going to check their WhatsApp chat, I'm going to check their messages, and I'm going to make sure they're not talking to someone nefarious. But do you know what their Snapchat is like? Do you know what their saved messages look like? Do you know if they have locked chats? You have to look into all those things and know about that. Ensure your child's social media is privatized and you're aware of who they're adding as friends. Now we live in this culture where the more followers you have, the more popular you are, the more notoriety you have, and people really admire that, right? And I think that's come from, celebrities or influencers, and sometimes kids take that as validation and they might get drawn into the appeal of having this big following. But when you have an open profile, you don't know who's following you, you don't know who has access to you, you don't know who's keeping an eye on your location, stuff like that. So know the phone numbers that your child has, what email addresses they're using, know who your kids are with, who they're hanging out with. And there's quite a few more, but I'll stop it at that. Just in terms of online tips, just be aware of what your kids are using in terms of apps.
Thank you so much. Now I kind of want to move towards caregivers and families that are already dealing with issues like runaway teens or teens using substances. Selma, what are some intervention or resources that you'd recommend for those parents?
Yeah, so alhamdulillah, in Peel, there are a ton of resources, right? So whether they're non-Muslim or Muslim, like culturally sensitive, for non-Muslim, there's the human trafficking crisis line that's available. There's victim services, Peel victim services. If you connect to them and you say that you're being trafficked, they will give a number of resources for you, or if you're the parent. There's Nasiha helpline if you're looking for more culturally sensitive. There's, like Omar said, Where to Start, which has a a number of mental health supports. So, if you've gotten out of trafficking, but, there's that trauma that you've been left with, and there's free counseling access through there. There's parenting support groups for parents as well. So there are a number of resources that have been listed and that are available. And there's so many more, but just know that there are resources to support you, and that, you're not alone, and that unfortunately, because this does happen a lot in Peel, there is access to that online.
I want to delve a bit on the resilience and building. As Omar mentioned in his presentation, low self-esteem is a common factor. So just can you elaborate on what strategies can parents use to help their teens build their resilience and self-confidence even further?
Yeah, for sure. So, like it's been mentioned, unfortunately, kids with low self-esteem are more likely to fall into human trafficking. So, as a parent, doing your best to bring that self-esteem up, monitoring your child's mental well-being and making sure that they're okay. And so, if you're noticing that they are having low self-esteem, questioning, is this because it's linked to social media? Because unfortunately, many statistics are showing that social media is causing a decline in self-esteem for a lot of youth. So, really monitoring their social media use, thinking, okay, how long is your screen time? When you're coming home from school, how long are you on your phone for? And if it is something that's, questionable or concerning, making sure that your child is involved in different activities, making sure that they're taking care of their health, making sure that they have good friends, right? Because friends is a really big part, is that friends can lead you into dangerous situations. So really watching, who are they hanging out with? Where are they going? Unfortunately, kids don't like this, but having your child's location is really important, right? Keeping track of where they are and the places that they're going, making sure that they're really involved and engaged in the community. So just doing whatever you can to keep them busy, giving them the right supports, making sure that they're doing well, and constantly monitoring them and checking in on them. I know parents are very busy now, and it can be really difficult with many kids, but unfortunately, when kids are neglected and maybe they're lacking that love or lacking that feeling cared for, that's when they can fall into things like this.
Thank you. I do want to wrap it up with one more question, just to be conscious of the time. Farhan, I'll kind of address this question to you. Could you share how law enforcement collaborates with communities, including the Muslim community, to prevent trafficking and ensure safety of vulnerable teens?
Of course. So in terms of law enforcement, our role essentially as police officers is to conduct investigations, assisting the victims of crime, lay charges, and deal with the legal aspect of things. However, our job doesn't stop there, because we also work with preventative type of approaches. And in terms of that, we do have units like the Human Trafficking Section, the Child, Youth, and Advocacy Center, Sex Crimes Unit, Neighborhood Community Officers, Liaison Officers, and other units that proactively assist with engaging the community and addressing any needs for preventative measures where it is possible. So I can speak to myself being a neighborhood community officer for 7 years. That's where I actually really got to know my community and be there. Not in the essence that I was there because of a specific purpose, but just being present, and that agency of presence makes such a big difference, because then people feel comfortable and they feel like, hey, I can communicate with this officer in an informal way to get some information. And that's typically how it starts for us, is if we're present, then people feel more comfortable to say, hey, I need some help. This is the type of situation that a friend is in, and I wanted to know, what is your advice to deal with something like this? So I found that just being present oftentimes was enough to send that invitation out. So we can do things like that as law enforcement. The other things that we also do as officers is we educate schools through and youth groups through presentations and seminars. We also educate parents to seek support from various agencies. We work with many partner agencies, almost like a focus table type setting, where we will come to the table to say, this is the individual we're dealing with, this is the situation that they're in. We will take care of the legal side of things where we have the ability to do so. And this is where we need the rest of the agencies we work with to step in to provide the resources that we as the police aren't necessarily able to commit to. So that's in a nutshell what we can do as officers and as a police service.
Thank you. Thank you to our panelists for sharing such valuable insight during the Q&A. Now we'd like to hear directly from the audience. So I'll be monitoring the chat and we'll direct any questions to our panelists. So please feel free to ask any burning questions. I'll start off with some that we've already discussed, but because we're recording this, I want to ensure everybody kind of gets the answer. So should we discuss human trafficking with our children to raise awareness? And anyone can really jump in the panel.
Yeah, I mentioned that, yes, we should talk to our kids, and I personally, I taught to my kids from a very young age. It's different because I'm in schools and I see what's happening. I want to protect my own kids, so I will start having conversations with them, maybe even earlier than people might think. But I did mention that in Peel to School Board, at the beginning of every year, we have actually these modules that teachers go through with the kids, with code of conduct, anti-vaping. This year was like no cell phones in the classroom, and one of them actually is on anti-human sex trafficking, and we start that from grade 7 and up.
And is there a specific age, or what age should we discuss this with our children?
Maybe Sister Salma?
Yeah, I think middle school and up is probably best. I think anything younger that maybe kids cannot really grasp, the contents, but definitely middle school. A lot of kids in middle school are on social media already, so they're being exposed to so many things. So it's best to start then, anywhere from grade 6 and up, really just having those discussions and of course tailoring it to their age. So, in grade 6, having more simple conversations about it, about, protecting our bodies and what that looks like, and who should we engage with, and what kind of conversations should we have online. And even just using Snapchat. Unfortunately, I have a lot of clients that are using Snapchat and sending pictures to men they don't know, right? And it's as simple as that, getting into human trafficking. So a lot of psychoeducation on social media, protecting our body, what consent looks like, things like that. And then, furthering the conversations as they age.
Next question is, are there any statistics for how prevalent human trafficking among the Muslim children? I could answer just a bit. There isn't much statistics specifically on the Muslim community, and it's because we aren't having these conversations. And I believe some of the panelists did mention that it is a very taboo topic, but inshallah, it'll be more inclusive as the years go on.
I can jump in just for a quick second from the policing perspective, and it's not just exclusive to human trafficking per se, but I find in my experience, the Muslim community generally does not report a lot of things. And we've been noticing that a lot in the past year with hate crimes. And the reason I tie that in is I think as a community, we do have a certain type of mindset when it comes to reporting things. Sometimes we feel it might fall on deaf ears. Other times we might feel like, what's the point? And other times people are just afraid to bring it to our attention, afraid of going to court. So there's many different reasons as to why our community doesn't report it. And most recently I found, and this is through conversations with my own family who have been victims of hate crimes, they've told me that, oh, Allah will forgive them, Allah will, guide them, which is perfectly fine. That is a good belief to have, but accountability is still key, because you can still pray for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive them and guide them, but it's important to report it as well. So I think that's the message that I try to send to our community is you can forgive a person and wish the best for them, but still hold them accountable, because if they get away with it once, they may do it again and victimize somebody else. So the importance of reporting is really what I want to highlight is, regardless of what type of offense it is, please, educate your friends, your family about the importance of reporting incidents, so that it gives us more tools as police officers to engage in these proactive measures to be preventative, if not dealing with it as a reaction.
Yeah. If you see something, say something. And I know there's like anonymous tip lines that you can also put in. Awesome. So when a parent notices the sign on her 14 to 15-year-old daughter, for example, for instance, found another cell phone and birth control pills in her school bag, what could be an appropriate response from the parent?
I'll defer to Salma on this, but I'm assuming you have experience with this. One thing I just want to say is that it's important for the parent to accept that this is happening, and that regardless if they're Muslim or not, that this is it's very real, and it's very possible that, yes, my child from a Muslim family might actually be involved in this. The situations I've dealt with Muslim families, as our officer was mentioning, because it's taboo, because they don't want to talk about it, because they don't want to deal with it, the response is, but Brother Omar, we're Muslim. What are you talking about? Why are you calling the police? We're Muslim. It's like, that's the default position, and somehow that just solves everything. Nothing's happening here, right? Look the other way. But that's so that my is to my response is at the very beginning to accept that this could be happening. Sorry.
Yeah, and just to add on again, that judgment-free piece, if this is happening, it's really just you have to acknowledge that it's happening. If you're having an emotional reaction, don't have it in front of the child. Take the time alone, step away, have the response that you need to, but when you go to them, really come to them and be like, okay, I'm here for you. How can I support? It can't be a situation of how could you do this? Or why didn't you tell me? Or this. Those are things that are only going to make the youth shut down. And that's not going to help at all. So really just letting them know, I'm so sorry this happened. How can I help? What can we do to support? And at that point, it would be best to access resources as well, whether it's long-term counseling, helplines, things like that. Because just alone as a parent, it might be difficult. Of course, letting authorities know so authorities can get involved and really try to figure out where this is coming from and what's happening. But being there on their side and letting them know, thank you so much for opening up to me. I know this is challenging. I know this is hard. Just know that I'm here for you and I'm going to help support you through this.
And then one thing I wanted to add is like the trauma-informed approach that you mentioned, judgment-free zone, and then also really taking the step of the child, right? Not kind of jumping all the way to law enforcement if they're not comfortable, because then they won't open up. So awesome. Another question is, what advice would you give to a parent or caregiver who feels disconnected from their teen and is unsure how to start a conversation about online safety or trafficking?
I can jump in. From a policing standpoint, I find a lot of times when we're trying to get information, whether it's from a youngster or even the parents, it's because they feel like there isn't a safe space to have those conversations. So as parents, like the other panelists have mentioned, if you can have those difficult conversations and introduce it as a safe space to say, I'm so sorry this happened to you, like Selma was saying, please let me know, what can I do to help? Because the last thing that you want is for your child to feel like they are not safe at home. Because if they're not safe at home, then that opens them up to looking for answers elsewhere, whether it be online, with friends, with other people that may not give them sound advice that's better for them. They will get advice that's not necessarily going to help them benefit. So it might be to their detriment. So if you can create that safe space, and honestly, a lot of times it's just through conversation, non-judgmental, like someone mentioned, just to say, hey, I'm here for you. I'm here to help you. As much as there is that religious angle for us, rather than talk about the punishment for what it is that you're doing, you can talk about, think about Allah's mercy. Allah brought this to our attention because now we can address it. So let us know, how can I help you? And if for whatever reason you feel you need to seek forgiveness, do that. But let's come up with a game plan of how we can move forward to make things easier for you so that you don't fall back into this situation where you are getting hurt.
And then something to add is that Sakina does offer these workshops to help ease those questions, especially with difficult conversations. So inshallah, in the future, we'll have more. Another question is, do you have any tips for parents and caregivers when balancing the need to protect their teens from harm while also allowing them independence and autonomy?
I think Officer Farhan mentioned a really good way to do that is to really, the phrase I use with parents is connection before correction, and build that relationship with your kids, have conversations with them, create that safe space where they know they can be in a judgment-free zone and have those conversations. I think that I would offer some advice, the same advice I give in my school setting, is that when we're trying to build a connection with our kids, we want to speak with them about these heavy topics. We first have to show them and expose and be a little bit vulnerable to show our kids that we are human beings too. We've gone through our own journeys as well. Yes, they may have happened 20 or 30, 40 years ago, but we've all kind of been there in some form or another. And that one way that I have found very effective as a counselor, as a parent, and other parents have mentioned the same, is to share our own stories of what are some of the challenges that we faced. What was life back like in the last century? What was life like for those who went to school in the 90s, or even the early 2000s for that matter? Life has changed so drastically. So what were some things we had to deal with, and how did we deal with it? Even sharing how we built, like ourselves as parents, how do we build relationships with our own parents? And how can we try to make relationship with our kids now, living in 2024? I'll just give you a quick example, just so it's right here. So my kid just finished grade 9, and I pulled out my grade 9 yearbook to share with her. And I went through all the stuff on the inside, and I hadn't read it in many, many years, and some of it's X-rated. But it's just interesting to show what life was like back then versus now. There's some similarities and some differences, but it's a way to make that connection with our kids. And then when you have the relationship and this you as human beings, then you can start having conversations about things that really matter in today's day and age.
Such an awesome tool. So another question is, as an organization working in this space, what can we do to to work more with youth on this, involving police, social workers, teachers, etc.?
So in terms of us working as police officers, sorry, I'll jump in to answer here. Like I said, we do have focus tables that we work with, and not necessarily, we don't have like a Muslim focus table that we deal with all the time, but we have different neighborhoods that we cater to. That's something that I can provide information for if anyone does have those questions for these focus tables. For anyone that doesn't know what a focus table is, it's basically us as the police come to a table with a whole bunch of other agencies that are, you know, nonprofit or government funded, all agencies that are there to help members in the community with whatever issues they're dealing with, whether it's homelessness or socioeconomic issues or food insecurity, all sorts of instances of care that they require. We can come to this table and work collaboratively. So to say, we as the police can help in this function, but now we need someone else to take up this. And oftentimes, whatever the issue is, can get resolved because it's just a matter of communicating to say, what can you provide, or who can jump in here and take the lead. And if we want to work, or organizations here that want to work with us as police, you can always reach out to us directly to say, hey, this is what we had in mind. This is a proposal that we want to put together. How can the police come in to help supplement the work we're doing and collaborate with us to help facilitate whatever it is that our goal is. So I can leave my email in here in terms of any organizations that want to get in touch with us. And for me, working in the community partnership unit, we do have a lot of officers that are liaisons in the community for different portfolios, and I can connect you with the right ones depending on what it is the organization needs.
Awesome. So another question, it says, Brother Ahmad mentioned that grade 12 students are involved with grade 9 students in human trafficking. Is there a duty to report for schools to have police intervene as soon as there's signs? What is the process in school environment?
Yeah, good question. So in school settings, there is a process that we do have to follow. Once we start to see some signs, we are charged with conducting an investigation. Once we have that information, we do go through our school. Every board has their own Safe and Caring Schools department. You go through them. There's a phone call to police. There's a very specific appeal police. There's a specific department that deals with teenage, or I guess youth human trafficking cases. We presented them all information, and then they take over the investigation from there. We also do have to call CAS, Children's Aid Society. That's part of something we have to do. And then once police have verified or gotten involved, then there's a lot of fallout, obviously, as you can imagine. It's a very upsetting situation to be in as a family, to go through something like that. Not always are the cases founded. Sometimes there is investigation, there's signs, they investigate, and it turns out to be nothing. Sometimes it doesn't appear to be enough evidence at the time, and a year later, or 2 years later, everything kind of comes out of the closet. So I'd like to note that the police do not shelf these things. They do keep them active for a certain amount of time in case other signs do develop. But after things have happened, there's always support for the families and for the students through social work support services, through our Board of Education, and then of course external communities, as have been mentioned already. Community partners, sorry, that have been mentioned already.
There isn't any questions in the chat, but there was one question that we had prepared beforehand, so I just wanted to bring it up. So specific advice do you have for foster parents of Muslim teenagers to help them recognize potential trafficking risks, especially since a lot of the teenagers have moved through multiple homes or experienced constant instability? Do you kind of have any advice for that?
I'm not an expert in foster families or anything of that sort. We have had, in my experience as a teacher and guidance counselor, as an administrator, we have had foster families. In fact, one location, one school I was at before, several families, or as I say, several couples were foster families or foster couples. And so this one school, we had a large number of foster siblings, I believe they're called. And so these, one of the issues that was a reoccurring issue was in the home itself. There was bullying going on, and I guess dominant structures of hierarchy happening within the home, which then made things difficult for the kids because they followed them to school. And so if I were to give some advice, I think it's for foster parents to be aware, if you have more than one foster child in your care, to be aware of the power imbalances that may exist inside the home itself and how that might play out in the school setting as well, in terms of their, the ability of a child who might be being bullied at home, how that might play out in terms of their involvement in school, connection to school, academic achievement, and so on. In one situation I'm remembering is that I think it was 5 kids. Yes, there are 5 kids in the home, and I guess the youngest, or the one who I guess was in the lowest, and actually they're all at the same school, high school. So the one who was lowest in the order never had breakfast because the other kids would eat all of it before they would be able to have any. So every day there was no breakfast for that person. That's an example of how that might impact how they do in school.
On the the topic of habitual missing youth or foster care, typically what we have found with kids that have gone through group homes or any type of foster parenting, we do find there are a lot of habitual runaways. What we offer as the Toronto Police is typically for kids or individuals that are between the age of 12 to 17. Most cases that we deal with, it's typically girls that are at risk of being exploited. If they meet the requirements, we have a thing called the care unit, which works with the CAS, the Children's Aid, to work with victims of human trafficking. Now, in terms of the care unit, what they do is they intervene with and provide support and resources to children and youth who are being sexually exploited and trafficked. They also assist our divisional investigators with missing and habitual missing youth who are identified as at risk. So the time that I find a lot of reports that we take for habitual runaways are either from group homes or foster care, where they've gone through many different homes. So they feel it's almost like there is no place that they can call home base. And that creates a bit of instability, which makes them more prone to running away from home, wherever it is that they're calling home at that time. So this care unit will also provide training and workshops and consultations with other jurisdictions if someone doesn't meet the requirements to be a part of the care program with Toronto. But we do work with other police services as well to provide those consultations. So we have that program in place if anyone wants more information on that.
Could be a great tool for educators in the chat. Question came up. So what are some of the methods that police use to investigate when something is brought to their awareness, if it's possible to share?
So typically, I can speak to what a general investigation looks like. Anytime we get a call for service, it'll generate as if someone wants to report an incident of human trafficking. The way that would play out is the call would be made. We would dispatch officers to attend to take the report from whoever it is that's filing the report. Once all the information is gathered, it gets submitted into a report. Notifications are made to the appropriate units. And in this case, it would be to our human trafficking section. And then there are detective constables that work within that unit that do their own investigation once it gets to their attention. And once it's handed off to them, the investigation is completely in their care. So as a frontline officer, I can't speak to what it is that they do in terms of their practices, in terms of what they investigate, but there are certain criteria that they have to adhere to and follow to make sure that they meet all the necessary steps to do a thorough investigation. So that's as much as I can speak to. Any specific things, I would have to get more information from our human trafficking section. I'm just going to mute it while the Adhan is happening here, sorry.
Thank you. We also did host a webinar with some law enforcement about this topic, and this topic was addressed. So we do have recordings. If anyone's interested, you can email Sumaya. Yes, Sumaya can put her email in the chat.
I can. Sorry. I can also add on, when I worked with victim services, I still work with them part-time. We worked closely with human trafficking clients and with the VICE team. So the VICE team is the team that would handle human trafficking. And so what the VICE team does is that they would conduct that investigation, and then they would collaborate with us to ensure that safety concerns were met. So what does that mean? Does that mean that do they need shelter? So we'd put them in a hotel, we'd provide them with new phones. So because the other phone was likely connected to their pimp or their trafficker. So new phones, access to food, shelter, all sorts of things to make sure that they're okay. And then even extended supports in terms of, okay, if there are some addictions that are put into place, can we get them in a detox center? You know, can we connect them to their family? Can we make sure that the right resources are put in place for supports in case there isn't that family support, that shelter support, or any other sort of safety support?
Thank you. I believe that was the last question. So I guess that concludes our audience question and answer portion of the webinar. So thank you all for your engagement with such an important topic. I'll go ahead and pass the spotlight to Sumaya.
Sure, thank you. Thank you to all of our incredible panelists, Omar, Farhan, and Salma, for sharing such valuable insights and giving your practical advice. I think today's discussion really highlighted the pressing issues that our youth are facing, and more importantly, the steps that we can take to protect and empower them. So as we conclude, let's just remember that safeguarding our teens is a collective responsibility that extends beyond our homes into our schools, communities, support networks, whether it's noticing subtle changes in behavior that was mentioned multiple times by all of our panelists, fostering open communication, being more vigilant about online safety. Every action we take will help create that safer environment for our teens. We started this program at Sakina Canada almost a year ago. Part of our program is prevention and awareness, and this is why we do these webinars in the hopes that we continue these conversations past the webinar into our homes, in our communities, to talk about human trafficking and everything that our panelists share with us. So thank you once again for joining us, for your questions and for your commitment to making a difference. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Great pleasure to be with everybody here today.
Thank you. Sorry, Amara, I just saw your question. We will be sending the recording of the presentation to all those who registered for the webinar. So you will be receiving it via email within the next week or so. Welcome.
Yeah, and I will put my email in here for anyone that has any other questions. I just sent 2 links in the chat there of resources that we have. The first link has access to a PDF. It's about 70 pages long, so it is a long PDF, but it basically gives you all the information that you may need to deal with anything to do with human trafficking that we can provide in terms of information as police. And then the second link I sent is again, a resource website for anything to do with human trafficking in terms of information we can provide as police. So I'll also add my email in here for anyone that wants to connect in terms of questions you may have, or if there's some collaborations from any organizations that want to get together and work with the police. And I will do my best to connect you with the right people if I am not able to help you in that realm.
Yep, I think we're good to go. I don't think anyone has any more questions. So once again, thank you so much, Jazakallah khair, for all of you and for all of your insights and sharing all the information that you did.
For sure. Thank you. So take care. Good to meet everybody. Take care.
Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.